Hi guys, this is Mike. In this Cinema 4D tutorial, I'm going to give you bevel tips. So the first tip is going to be transitional bevels. So when we have a type of crease that we put in, say if you're going to model a car hood or a car bonnet, you're going to have this creased metal that runs across your hood, but it transitions into a very smooth and smooths out so we don't have that crease. So in order to do that, we can go to, say, a plane, but we want to make sure that we stay with very low polygons, very low geometry. So we're going to bring this down to 3. And let me go to my top view. And we'll bring this to, go to our displays and give a wireframe. And we'll press C on the keyboard to make this editable. Now what we want to do is we want to have this transition that goes from one end to the other, but smooths out towards the back end. So the way we can do that is we can go to our edge and we can use our slide tool. Click on an edge and we're going to bring this over. Click on this edge, bring this over, and then just slide this together. We'll go to polygon mode, live selection. We'll go to perspective mode, and then we're going to select these polygons here, and we're just going to pull them upward in this axis. Okay, next what we want to do is we want to go to subdivision surface, and we're going to drag our plane underneath the subdivision surface. You can see how we have this smooth transition. So if you want to toggle between your subdivision surface and turning it off, we can go to Q on our keyboard, and that'll bring it back and forth if you need to toggle that, instead of going back and forth to our object manager. So we're going to go to live selection, or excuse me, we're going to go to edge mode. So press return until you get to your edge mode. And we're going to select our edges. If we double click with our directional tool, and then holding down shift, double click again on this edge, now we have these 2 edges selected. We're going to go to MS on our keyboard to bring up our bevel. And what we want to do is we want to add in an edge that goes on either side of each of these 2 selected edges. So in order to do that, we're going to give this one subdivision. And we're going to click and drag until we have a nice, tight, very tight bevel. Okay, great. So let's press Q on our keyboard, and let's do a Command R to see our bevel with it rendered. And I'm going to go to my subdivision surface. I'm just going to put this up to 3 for our editor, just so we have a smoother render. Command R, and you can see this very nice crease that we have on our bevel. But what we want to do is we want to smooth out these edges here, so this crease just kind of blends right into our geometry. So what we're going to do is we're going to press Q on our keyboard in order to take off our subdivision surface. And we want to spread out these edges just a little bit so we have a little bit of a smoother transition. So we can go to our slide tool again. And let me zoom in so we can kind of see this a little bit better. So I'm going to click this edge, and I'm just going to slide it. Click this one and slide this up. We want to make this pretty even. Click and drag, and then click and drag. And let's rotate around and see, make sure this is pretty even. So I'm looking at the spacing between these lines. So let's zoom out, rotate around, and Q, and then we'll do a Command R. So now you can see that we have this crisp edge here, and it slowly smooths out until in this nice transition. And so we can experiment a little bit with these spacing of these points. So if we can go to point mode, let's zoom in here a little bit, and let's pull these a little bit tighter. And we can spread these ones out a little bit more. So there's a little bit of a manual approach to this in order to get it to the way that you want it. Now if I press Q, Command R, you can see that we now have this nice smooth transition. And you can go back and forth in trying to get the amount of crease that you want. If you want it pretty tight up here and then it smooths out, you can do that as well. Make sure I have my subdivision surface on. And you can see this nice smooth transition, but we have a nice sharp crease here. In this lesson, I'm going to talk a little bit how better planning can help you avoid a few of the problems you have when beveling geometry in Cinema 4D. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a disk, and I'm going to go to my top view, F2 on your keyboard, and we're going to bring the rotation segments down to 8 and disk segments to 2. And then I'm going to press C on the keyboard. And then I'm going to go to NB. And let me go to my top view again. And what I want to do is I want to select these polygons. And I'm just going to expand this. Just scale it out a little bit. And now what I want to do is go to edge mode. Select these edges and dissolve. I'm going to make a copy of this because we're going to be making a few different versions so I can show you what I'm talking about a little bit better. So what I want to do next is I want to go to polygon, my polygon pen, go to point mode, and what I want to do is I want to command click and drag and extrude this out, bring my point over here to the center, command click and drag, snap this, weld these 2 points, command click and drag, and I want to weld these points together so this line stays straight and we make a nice corner. Do the same thing over here. Just make sure this is nice and straight. Command click, snap, command click, weld that. Make sure this is straight. Bring this into a corner. Command click and drag, weld these. Bring this over here. Command click. And in order to make these nice and straight, keep this nice and organized, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my rectangle selection, select these points, press T. In this axis, holding down Shift, we're going to go down onto 0. Hit our space bar to toggle between our last used tool. Space bar again, hold down Shift, get down to 0. And we're going to do the same thing over here to our sides. Okay, great. Next, what I want to do is I want to go to edge mode, select my live selection, select my edges, and then command click and drag once, and then command click and drag again. Okay, so before going any further, I want to make my second object. So I'm going to go to my, I'll just name this object 2. Object 1. Doesn't matter what it's called. Just make it a little bit organized here. So object 2, let me go to model mode and just kind of bring this over so we have some room. I'm going to go to edge mode, or point mode would be fine. Polygon pen. Now I'm going to set this up a little bit differently. So I'm going to command click and drag. Let me zoom in here. And I want to make sure this is straight. Make sure these points are straight. This lined up a little bit. Command click and drag. Weld these. Command click and drag. Command click and drag. And then pull these points down. Make sure these are welded. Do the same thing over here. Weld these. Pull this out. Command click and drag. So extrude these. And then let's just fill in these corners here. Whoops. Command click and drag. Weld. Command click and drag. Weld. And command click and drag and weld this. And then we can do the same thing we did before. Press 0. Select these points. T. Get down to 0. Space bar. T. That to 0. Space bar. To 0. And get these nice and organized, nice and clean. We can kind of make it close to the object that we have over here, but doesn't have to be exact. So now we're going to go to edge mode and we're going to extrude. Select these edges, command click and command click. Okay. Let's go to our perspective mode. And with these objects made, you can see they're not exactly perfect, and we can shape this so it's a little bit closer to each other. But the point is now that we have these two objects, kind of the base made for each one, you can see how the corners are a little bit different between each other. So it's a little bit different in terms of its geometry. And I'm going to show you where I'm headed with this when we start adding in the bevel. So what I want to do is I want to select these two objects and I want to hold down command and drag so we have a duplicate of these. So I'm just going to go to, you can name this object 3, object 4, or object 1A and object 2A, whatever you want to do. Just so we're a little bit organized. And I'm just going to hold down Option, double click, so we hide those two objects. In fact, let me go to model mode. I'm just going to drag this so they're not right directly on top of each other. Oops. I'm going to move them over to the side here. Okay, so we have our object 1, and what I want to do is I want to go to our polygon mode, and I want to select these polygons, And I want to command holding down this axis, click and drag, and I'm just going to pull this down so we have this nice little insert. I'm going to select these polygons and pull these down. And I'm going to drop this into a subdivision surface. Okay, so we have this nice round, nice smooth transition, but we want to get a nice crease. We want to have a nice edge on these areas here. So I'll show you this edge here. So suppose we want to have this edge, nice sharp crease, same here, and on these around this lip of this insert. So what I would do is I would go to my directional tool. I would double click on this. So we have a selection here, MS on our keyboard to bring up our bevel. And I'm going to put an edge on either side. So I want to add 1. And maybe I want to get this a little bit tighter. So I'll go to Q, kind of see how that looks. Now I want to put another one here on the bottom. So I'm just going to double click MS, and we're just going to have 0 subdivisions. So we have an edge on the top. We already have one here on the bottom. So when I press Q, we have this nice edge here at the bottom and at the top. So let's go to these two edges here. Double click, shift, double click, MS, and then we're going to put in an edge on either side of this edge so we have a nice crisp edge like we have here. And then we'll put this in our subdivision. Okay, so let's do the same thing to our second object, but you'll notice that we have slightly different geometry. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go to our polygon pen. We'll do a UL. I mean, not polygon pen, we'll polygon mode. And we'll go to UL, select these, go to E, command click and drag, and then we'll put a bevel. MS, and we have one subdivision, so we're just gonna pull this out, and then we have another one here. We'll do the same thing, so I'm just gonna double click, MS, 0 subdivisions, and then we'll put in our subdivisions down here at the bottom, and we can use our directional tool. If you select and then select all the way at the edge and then just double click, that we'll have a selection that goes across both of these. So what I'm going to do is give this another bevel, one subdivision will be fine. And I forgot to bring this down, so I'm just going to undo. I'm going to bring this down a little bit, and then I'll go back to my edge mode, MS, and then bring out this nice bevel. Okay, so I'm going to put this into a subdivision surface, my object 2. And now let's take a look at our wireframe. So if you press MB on your keyboard, you're going to have your wireframe, garage shading lines. And so we're going to zoom in here, and you can see this bunched up mess of geometry. And if I go to my object 1, and go to edge mode, and let's click off so we deselect that selection. And we zoom in here, we can see this sort of a mess of geometry. So in order to fix this, what we would do is I would go to my polygon pen, go to point mode, and you know, there's a couple ways you could do this. You can use your weld, but I like using the polygon pen tool, and I'm just gonna click and drag, that's gonna weld, click and drag, and that's gonna weld. click here, and that's going to weld, and I'm going to click over here, and that welds that. So now we don't have that weird bunching of geometry. Let's move over here on this side. We can do the same thing. So I'm just going to weld, weld, and weld here, and weld here. So now that fixes that one issue. By having this edge that comes all the way over and connects here, we then cleaned up that edge. But boy, that's a lot of little tweaking and working. And this is just a particular case where we just have these two edges here. So that could be a problem as you move forward, and it just becomes sort of a mess. Now we have something similar over here, but instead on these edges here, we have this complex geometry all bunched up here on these corners. So I'm going to go to my object 2, and let's take a look and see what's going on here. So I'm going to turn off my subdivision surface, and you can see what's happening. This geometry, as it got beveled out in this corner, it's subdivided, and now we have this quad system, and it's just making this mess of our geometry. So what we would do is we could use our polygon pen tool, but we can also use our weld. So if I go to my selection tool, one of our selection tools, you can use rectangle selection. So we'd select these points, space bar, and then we're going to weld it right in the center point. Do the same thing over here, space bar, and that welds together. So let's press Q on the keyboard. So that fixes that. We got that nice and cleaned up. But now we have a few more over here. We would have to do the same thing. Let's press Q, space bar, weld that, select these guys, weld that one. We'll come over here, let me rotate around, zoom in, space bar, weld, space bar, select, and then we got that cleaned up. And then we have this one more in this corner over here. Let me center this a little bit, zoom in, select these, space bar, select these, space bar, and weld in the center. Okay, great. So that's all cleaned up, but boy, that was a lot of work of just going back and forth. And this, again, this is just one little section here. So that can be a real issue as you're moving forward. So with a little bit of planning, you know, and this will come with experience as you start modeling, you'll start to see little areas that you know are going to come up and you're going to have this little issue. So we're going to have issues here as we use different types of geometry depending on what we're trying to do. And there's all kinds of reasons why we might want to have this system. And let me turn off our subdivision surface. We might have a reason why we have this particular setup. And this is just sort of a cutout, but this would go along with a global geometry that we would have for a particular model. So as we're doing this, it's a good idea to plan out our objects a little bit better. So in this case, you can see in our first object how this issue came about right here on these corners. So let's zoom in here and let's add in our little inset real quick. And we'll just go to UL, polygon mode, select this here, E, command click and drag and pull this down. And let's grab our polygons here and we'll just drag this down. I'm trying to even, getting this pretty close, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So I want to bevel this out here, and I could do this easily enough. We didn't have any problems in this inset. So just go to E, return, get to our edge mode, double click, MS, bevel that out. Make sure we have one subdivision. E, double click, MS, 0 subdivisions. We're going to have that. So that'll be a nice tight crease. But you know what's going to happen when we add in this bevel here, we're going to have this issue in these corners. So instead of fighting that, what we're going to do is we're going to select these two edges and we're going to dissolve. So now we're going to put in our bevel. So now we don't even have to worry about that just yet. We'll go to MS, make sure we have one subdivision. So we have that bevel on now. Now we can go to our polygon pen tool or our knife tool. We'll go to point mode. Let's zoom in. Let's deselect these points. And now we can bring our edge by clicking and putting in a cut line here and here. So now when I go to my subdivision surface, let me put that on real quick. You can see now we don't have that issue. So it's just a matter of predicting when you're going to have an issue where you have lines connecting into each other and then you want to bevel that out. Make sure you take a look at what you're doing before you start applying your bevel. Okay, so now we got that one. Let's figure this, get a solution for this one. So we have our object, and let me just get a subdivision surface in here because we know we're going to need that. Deselect these points, turn that off for a minute. And so let's go to polygon mode. Let's go to UL. Now, here, we're going to have an issue with the corners as we had before. So how do we fix this problem before we even extrude, before we give this an insert, before we extrude this downward? So what we want to do is we want to protect this edge here. So let me go to my directional tool and select this edge. This edge here we want to protect. So in order to do that, we could do that in a few different ways. We can use our slide tool and just clone that out. So holding down Command, and we're just going to pull this in. So we know we're going to have a bevel that's going to go on this edge. So we can pull that in. We can also use our knife tool. We can use our loop cut tool. We can also add in a cut if we want to do it that way. We can do it that way as well. But the point is what we want to protect this edge before we extrude it down. So I'm going to go to polygon mode, select these polygons, UL, select this loop, and then we're going to go to our extrude, holding down E, we're going to extrude this down. And now we can go to our edge and we can add in a bevel. I'm going to do this separately so you can see this. So I'm going to select that edge, I'm going to MS, and now I'm going to extrude this. Oops, I want to make sure this is at 0 subdivisions. So I'm going to extrude this down. Oh, excuse me, not extrude. I'm going to give this a subdivision, this bevel. Now I'm going to do the same thing on this bottom here. Just kind of get this even. So now when I put on my subdivision surface, you can see that we do not have any of this bunching that we had in our previous example. So the point on this one is to make sure that you protect your edges if you're going to be adding in a bevel. So it's all about the intersection of these points, of these vertices. So what I want to do next is just simply go to our polygons here, select these, pull these down, go to our edge mode, double click just like we did before, holding down shift, double click, MS, and then we'll go to one subdivision. So as you can see, we have two different ways, two different scenarios, but if we just use a little bit of planning before we start adding in our bevel, you can avoid doing a lot of extra work. And so I'm just going to put our subdivision surface on each of these, press a return. You can see we have this nice clean edge on our objects. I put a link in the description to download project files. You can also go to astronomic3d.com to download project files from this tutorial and all the tutorials that I've made so far. Thanks for watching.